Great. Okay. Okay, so you've got your basics. Who can legally work in the US? You have United States citizens, lawful permanent residents, asylees and refugees, and non-citizens authorized to work. And actually, I guess I didn't really introduce myself. I'm a managing partner at this law firm in Northampton, Massachusetts. So we're about an hour away from Vermont. And we work in all areas of immigration. That's all we do. So we work with asylees. We do some pro bono work in that area. We worked a lot with Afghanistanis. We also do business visas too. We work with large institutions, small businesses. We kind of do a mix of everything. So I'm not going to talk about everything today, but just so you know who we are, if anybody has follow-up questions afterwards that's sort of unrelated to this topic today, here we'll share my email address at the end, and you're welcome to get in touch with us. Okay, so who are we looking at? US citizens is what you're used to. They show their passport, they start work, but you also have lawful permanent residents. That's sort of the step right before citizen. They have unfettered ability to work in the United States. They can travel. It's permanent. They could stay that way for their entire lives. They don't have to move on to citizenship. So it's important to recognize the difference between them and some of these other categories. We have asylees and refugees, which is sort of that next step. An asylee or refugee also is allowed to stay here pretty much permanently, and they are pretty unrestricted when it comes to work. But then you have people who require work cards. So some of the people are coming in from Afghanistan are on something called humanitarian parole, and they need work cards. And then you have people who are applying for asylum but don't have it yet, and they need work cards as well. So it's understanding these different documents. This is the basics. As you know, the I-9, you have to complete section 2 within 3 business days of employment. You have to see the documents. They have to reasonably appear genuine. It's not on you to verify that these documents were really issued from a certain government, but if they look reasonably genuine, then you're covered. They shouldn't be presenting photocopies. They should only be presenting actual documents. There is at the moment the ability to use copies, but only for pure remote employees. So if you are hiring employees, as we're starting to do in California, Texas, places like that, you can still use copies. At least for now. It's supposed to expire in October, but they keep extending it. But that doesn't work for employees that are going to be on site. It sounds like most of your employees will be if you can find them. So this is the basic. You fill out section 1 on or before the first day of work. The employee fills it out, and then they present a document. Now this is going to be a list A document or a list B and C document. A list A document is a document that on its own is enough to establish who somebody is and that they have the ability to work. So some documents, that's all you need, like a US passport. It's got your photo, it's got your name, it shows your status, you're all set. And then sometimes you need a combination of a B and a C. So one is an identity document and the other one shows your status in the US and your ability to work. You can make copies, you don't have to. If you keep copies of someone's documents, make sure you do it for everyone. So we don't make them because we don't want to have to remember to do it for everybody. So just make sure that you're consistent. These are some questions that we've had about I-9s in the past. Can you hire somebody without social security number if they've applied for it? They've showed you that they're work authorized. Yes, you can do that. It just makes it a little bit complicated for tax reporting purposes. So if somebody just doesn't have their card yet, but they do have a B and C document or a list A document, you can start them with employment. Sometimes people will present receipts like, oh, I've applied for this document. A receipt is not usually enough. If you have lost your document or your document was stolen, destroyed, yes, then you can ask for replacement. In that case, they could show you a copy, say, I lost this document, I've applied for replacement, that's different. So they show you the receipt and then they have to show you within 90 days that they've got it. But showing like, hey, I've applied for asylum is not enough. You have to actually get the work card in most cases. So there are some employment authorization cards where if it's expiring and they filed for a timely extension, then they're automatically allowed to keep working. But this is specific to certain categories and it's going to be hard to remember it. So you probably just have to look it up each time. And again, if you ever have a question, I'm always here if somebody wants to ask. So again, copies, you don't need to make them, just make sure you treat everybody the same. Expiration date. So sometimes you get a document and it has an expiration date on it. And you say, I don't really want to hire this person because it looks like their status is going to expire. I don't want to bring somebody in that's going to leave. So you cannot not hire somebody just because of their expiration date, but you can ask them if they're going to require sponsorship from you in the future. So there are some work authorization cards that will expire, but usually there's an eligibility to keep extending it. So if someone has applied for a green card, they have a work authorization card, it does have an expiration date, but they are going to be able to extend it. So you don't want to reject somebody just because there's an expiration date. But someone like that, if you say, well, will you need sponsorship from me in the future? They will say no, because they know that they can keep extending this card until they get the green card. So there's a difference there. You don't want to discriminate just because of somebody has a card that's expiring. So it doesn't matter if the Social Security card is not signed. That comes up sometimes. Sometimes the names are a little bit different. That's okay. If it looks like, okay, it's pretty much this person, maybe there's a middle initial, middle name, something's misspelled, that's fine. So the statuses that you're likely to see, here's the basic cards. The one in the middle top, this is the green card. So if you get a green card, occasionally you'll have a green card that has an expiration date of 2 years. Even if it does, you do not have to re-verify them. As soon as they've gotten this card in any form, you only have to I-9 them one time. To the right of that is a stamp that will say I-551. So sometimes someone is a green card holder, but they don't have the physical card for whatever reason. In that case, they can get a stamp from USCIS. I-551 means that they are a lawful permanent resident. So they basically mean the same thing, except that when it's just a stamp, then you do have to re-verify it at the end of its expiration. And over to the left, you'll have what you may see the most. This is the employment authorization card. You see in the sample, there's a category. The category here is C9. C9 means that this authorization card is for someone who applied for a green card, but the green card has not been approved yet. So, that's fine that you'll see different ones. You'll see C8. That's for people who have applied for asylum, but their asylum has not been approved yet. And this document is fine. You see this document has a photo, and it also has an expiration date on it. So if you see this, you don't have to worry about what category it is, C8, C9, or what did Megan say? You don't have to remember. As long as it's an employment authorization card, it's valid, and it's got their photo. So that's a list A document. If you see an expiration, you might ask, well, will you need sponsorship in the future? But again, you always want to try and keep all of your practices consistent. So if you ask that for anyone, you should ask it for everyone. And so if you're going to be working with foreign nationals, we suggest just making that a part of what you ask everybody. Will you need sponsorship in the future? Down below, you see two documents. They're actually the same document on the left. These are both I-94 cards. So there's some confusion. People think sometimes a visa in a passport is some sort of indication of status. It isn't. A visa and a passport is basically just like a stamp to get into the park. It lets you into the country, but it does nothing for you once you're here. The document that really matters is this document called an I-94. And most people who come in will get an I-94 saying this is what your status is. So for someone who has asylum, they will get an I-94 saying they have asylum. If they're admitted as a refugee, they'll have an I-94 saying that they're a refugee. So sometimes they'll present this I-94 document, and then because it doesn't have a photo, they have to present it with a photo document such as a passport. There's two different types of I-94s. The one in the middle is the paper one. They used to give it out all the time. You still see it from time to time, but now most people, when they come in, they get an electronic one that they have to look up. So this one on the left is more and more common these days. Green cards, if you see those, again, that's a list A document. You might see a 2-year expiration date. You might see a 10-year. You don't have to re-verify it no matter what. It's just that stamp that you have to re-verify. So we've been talking a lot about the new people in your community, these refugees. You're likely to see a few different kinds of status here. So these are the ones to look out for. First of all, down below on the right is humanitarian parole. So a lot of the people from Afghanistan in particular are being paroled into the country. They came in, they were on US military bases, and they they got this parole, and it's usually for a couple of years. Most I've seen have been either for ending this year or next summer. So they are not eligible to work until they get a work card. So just because they have this I-94 saying they're paroled, it's not an eligible work status. So they have to take that next step and get the card. And the card will have an expiration date, and you'll have to watch out for that and make sure you re-verify when that expiration date is reached. Many of them will then go on to apply for asylum. So you may have a number of them that are no longer using their employment authorization card for parole. Now they're using it based on their pending asylum application. So that is a different category, but it's essentially the same card. It's an employment authorization card. It will have an expiration date. They have to keep renewing it. Now, one difference between these two is actually asylum pending is one of the categories that gets auto extension. So if their expiration date is coming up and you say, okay, it's coming up in my system that I need to re-verify you, then they will say, well, I filed my extension, but it hasn't been approved yet. Now, for this particular category, that's okay. They can keep working. Now, as of May or April, they can keep working for another 540 days waiting for the decision, which is nice. And then you have asylees and refugees. They're the next step along in the process. Asylees have gone through the process. They've applied for asylum. Now they have asylum, and they do not need to be re-verified. So what they will get when they win their asylum case is they'll get an I-94 from the government that says they are asylees. Now, they're also allowed to apply for EADs. That's the employment authorization document, and they often do. So sometimes they'll present to you this List A asylum EAD, but the truth is their status doesn't really expire. So if you get that, you can ask to re-verify, but I've had several clients where they'll come to me, they didn't file the renewal, but they really don't need to. And I've had to explain to the employer, well, actually, you don't need to re-verify them. Instead of the EAD, they should have given you their passport and their I-94 so that you would know that they're asylees and you don't have to re-verify. It's the same thing with refugees. The main difference between a refugee and an asylee is that asylees apply for it in the US after coming in on a different status, and they're kind of going through the stages of the process. A refugee has already been admitted in that final status. So that means that they went through all that processing probably at a refugee camp abroad. So they went through all that. They've already been processed and screened, and they've been admitted to the US in this final status. And again, that will be on their I-94. They'll show something like a passport and the I-94. If it says they're a refugee, they're all set. So I know it's a little confusing, but these are the four that you're likely to see. And sometimes until you get used to these documentations, you might have to dig a little bit, do a little Googling. There's a lot of great stuff on the USCIS website to help you out with this. So again, I mentioned this, some categories, if you file a timely extension, you can keep working. It used to be 180 days while you're waiting for the extension. And now just a few months ago, they changed it to 540 days, which is nice. So these are the main ones you'll see this for are people who have an EAD card because they're applying for asylum or because they're applying for a green card. That's category C8 and C9. But again, I would not assume you're going to remember any of this. If you just remember enough to think, there are some categories that have automatic extension. I remember that. And then you look it up. That's really all I'm hoping you'll get out of it today. Occasionally, you might see F1 students. I don't think so yet, but a lot of these refugees are coming into the country and they're starting to enroll in programs, and you might start to see this over time because a lot of them are going into this. And I've seen some people from Afghanistan coming in directly as F1 students, even though they're then applying for asylum after. So this is kind of unique. For F1 students, they have an I-94 that says DS, which means duration of status. And then you also need a document from their school called an I-20 that says that they're authorized to work for you. So it doesn't come up very often, but they have a document like this that is, and usually this is because they finished a school program and they're given like a year to work in the United States for anyone that they want. And for this, you're going to see this document from the school, you'll see the I-94, and you'll see like a photo ID like their passport. So again, if that comes up, all you really need to remember from today is that it's a little unusual and that the documents are going to look a little different than what you're used to. And again, if you can ask a question if you're not sure. So again, re-verification, You don't want to re-verify passports or green cards or identity documents. For the green card, it's just if they have that stamp, you do need to watch the expiration. And those List C documents usually have an expiration date, and some of the List A ones, like the employment authorization document. So storage, you have to keep your I-9s current, find a good system. A lot of companies, their problem is they really don't have a good system. If they don't hire a lot of foreign nationals, then they're not used to this re-verification process. So if you're starting to get a workforce that's looking a lot, you're starting to have a lot of documents that are not US passports, you have to have a good system in place to make sure that you remember to go back and re-verify. So it's easy with big companies, but if you're smaller, it's going to be harder to remember this, but it's really important. So your I-9s, you can store them electronically if you want. You don't have to keep them in a paper file anymore, even microfilm. I don't think anyone uses that anymore, but and you just have to have the forms somewhere where they can be presented within 3 days of inspection. Okay, and you just need to keep them from 3 years from the date of hire or 1 year after termination, whatever is later. So now we get into what do you have to be careful about? You're walking a fine line when you're hiring foreign nationals because you don't want to follow the rules on either side. You don't want to hire somebody who doesn't have documentation, but you also don't want to discriminate. And there's a lot of conduct prohibited on both sides. So you don't want to hire somebody who's undocumented if you know that they are not authorized to work. So that is the key. And once you realize that they have become unauthorized, like for example, you have their employment authorization document and it expired and you know they have not filed for a renewal. Now you are knowingly hiring them without permission. And hiring anybody without keeping records, if you don't do your I-9 quickly, if you forget to do it for 3 months and then go back and pay back wages, this is all problematic. But you also want to be careful not to discriminate and treat everybody the same. Just a little more on that. The best way to figure out if someone needs sponsorship is just to ask, make that, like I said, make that a part of your questioning every time. Do you require sponsorship? Will you ever require sponsorship? And that should cover you, because it is okay to not hire somebody who will only be able to stay with you for 6 months. That makes sense. You can also confirm that they're able to communicate in English, but that has to be something that's really required for your job. And sometimes it comes up like, well, are they allowed to all speak Spanish or speak Dari on the job? When maybe it makes some of your workers uncomfortable, especially if some of your employees are not used to working with foreign nationals. If they're always hearing this other language on the job, and like, well, can they do that? Can we tell them not to do that? You should not be controlling what language they speak unless speaking English is actually essential to your business, either for efficiency or customer service, something like that. So be careful about that. But, often it is a requirement of the job, so you can ask that. What you don't want to do, first of all, you cannot express a preference for a certain List A, B, or C document. You can't say, well, I would love to see a passport, or I'd rather see a green card, or I'd rather see this or that. Whatever they present, if it's valid, you have to go with that document. So one thing you want to be careful about too is how you do your recruiting. And this is really stressful. This is where I find it stressful for my company, because what you want, and I hear many of you do, you want to target certain ethnic groups because you want to bring them in and you want to reach out to this community. I would just say be careful about doing it. I mean, you can decide how you want to walk that line, but you don't want to target certain ethnic groups even if you're trying to diversify your workforce, because it could still be seen as a form of discrimination. So if you advertise in one kind of place, make sure your advertisements are broad enough to catch a lot of people. You may catch some immigrants by word of mouth, but just make sure, however you're doing it, like, am I treating every race the same, or am I expressing a preference for this one particular ethnic group? And you want to avoid asking questions about that as well when you're doing your recruiting and interviewing. So again, you'll see it usually when, you'll see it if you see a passport, you'll say, okay, this person's from Afghanistan, but don't be trying to seek them out just because it's a community that you'd really like to help. Hopefully that you'll engage in recruitment efforts that will be broad enough, that it will be welcoming, and then it will reach that community in a really big way, but make sure it's open to reaching other communities too. So just keep in mind, for employment, we're talking about, not violating employment rules. If you hire anyone to perform services or labor in exchange for any remuneration or other payment, that's considered employment. So by the Department of Homeland Security. So if you are giving them food or lodging or anything like that, and they're working for you, you should be thinking about this and making sure that they do have work authorization. It doesn't include independent contractors. So you have some people that will own their own business, and then that business will come in and you're kind of not sure. I don't know if everyone in that business is authorized to be here, but that's not on you. You're not required to inspect documents for independent contractors. But as you know, you've probably gotten into this, like if you're hiring individual people to work at your job and they're individuals, you're not hiring like a sub company. Are they really contractors or are they really employees? And so there's a lot of rules around that. So just be careful, and not just like state rules and federal rules. So make sure you're not bringing someone as a contractor when they really should be an employee and they should be inspected.